Hey everybody, it's Lon.TV, and we are back with another free app hidden gem. This one on the Mac. It is called UTM. It is free and open source, and this allows you to run Windows 11 or Linux virtually. And if you are running the ARM version of Windows 11 or Linux, you'll get pretty close to system performance here. Running these on your Apple Silicon Mac. And I know a lot of you have been eyeballing some of these MacBook Airs. I've got the M2 Air that I got about 2.5 years ago. And this thing is still more than adequate, both for stuff that I do on the Mac side, but also in Windows here and on the Linux side. And a couple of days ago, some of these were selling for like under $700, which is pretty crazy. I think you can still get a bunch at around $799 with adequate RAM to do what you're seeing here. So I thought what I would do in this video is show you what UTM is all about. We'll look at how you can get Windows and Linux to boot up very easily. And there's a couple of other little neat things built into this, because even though I'm not running with an Intel processor anymore, I can boot up Intel operating systems in emulation as well. And if you have an Intel Mac, you can run most of these OSs natively and virtually with your built-in Intel chip. So a lot of fun stuff to look at here. This is based on QEMU, which is an open source emulation framework. And I was really impressed with how easy this was to get up and running, and also how low impact it is, especially compared to what you might see with Parallels or VMware Fusion. If you just need to load up Windows and run an app every once in a while, this is going to be the way to do it. It is free, and you don't have to worry about the license changing on whatever deal they're making for you this week. So we're going to dive into this in just a second, but I do want to let you know, in the interest of full disclosure, that this is not a sponsored video. I paid for the Mac here with my own funds. All of the opinions you're about to hear are my own, and no one is reviewing or approving what you're about to see before it was uploaded. So let's get into it now and see what UTM is all about. Now, I will put a link to where you can download UTM in the video description. Again, it is free and open source. They do have a version on the Mac App Store that they sell for $10. And this is the same exact version you can download for free from their website. But this version will update itself through the Mac App Store, whereas on the web download, you have to update it yourself. But beyond that, it is the same application. They are using the Mac App Store sales to draw more attention to their app and also raise money for the project, but you don't have to pay for it if you don't want to. Now, you saw already that we have Windows 11 here running. This is the ARM version of Windows 11. But one thing to note about Windows 11 is that it has compatibility with both 32-bit and 64-bit apps that were designed for Intel and AMD processors. So for example, if I jump into my start menu here, I can load up a really old application that I've got here. I used to use this in my old job, called Microsoft Fox Pro. That just boots up and runs without issue here. You can run just about any basic application here in the Windows environment, irrespective of whether or not it was designed for the ARM processor. So altogether, I found compatibility here to be just as good as it would be on a Windows ARM laptop that might have a Qualcomm chip inside. And for quite a while, the best way to run Windows ARM was on a Mac, and you'll get great performance here. One caveat, though, for gamers is that the Windows installations do not support GPU access to the Apple Silicon processor. So you're not going to get good gaming performance out of here, but you probably wouldn't get that anyhow, because most games are written for Intel or AMD, and the emulation also slows things down. So this is going to be useful if you've got a few Windows applications that you have to use every once in a while. For example, my wife has to use the old Windows version of QuickBooks for her PTO treasury activities. So that sort of stuff will run fine here. Games and other high-end applications will not. But in most cases, most modern apps you can find on the Mac side and run them without issue. On the Linux side, you can get the GPU to work on Linux, so you might see some better performance on applications that take advantage of that there. And I found overall that there really wasn't any limitation here. I can install and play around with Docker containers and development tasks and have a nice sandboxed environment here for working on Linux applications without impeding anything on the Mac side beyond just using some of the system resources. You can also set up shared folders so you can move files very easily in and out of the application. Now, some of the commercial virtualization applications that are out there do allow for drag and drop and some other features that might add some conveniences. But if you're not virtualizing all that often, or you really don't want to go through the expense and system bloat that sometimes those applications provide, I think this is a really easy way to do it. Why don't we dig into this now and see how some of the mechanics work. So let's take a look at the mechanics of getting an operating system working here on the Mac. As you can see, I've got a bunch of OSs installed, and we'll take a look at some fun retro ones in a little bit. But to get started, you'll have a blank slate here, and what you do is click on the plus icon here at the top. And when you click on that, you'll be given the option to virtualize or emulate. So if you're running an operating system that is built for ARM chips like we have in our Mac, then select virtualize. But if you want to emulate something else, you'll click on emulate, because if you are trying to run something for an Intel or AMD based chip, or maybe even going back further like we'll do later with the classic Mac, you'll need to do the emulation. But one thing I like is that they have a pre-built gallery where you can get started a lot quicker. So if I click on this link, it'll pull up our web browser. And as you can see, they've got a bunch of stuff here that is fully baked and ready to go. So for example, I was running the Ubuntu 22.04, the ARM 64 version right here. All you got to do is click on this, click download, and what you will get is a pre-installed image that you can boot right up into the virtualization software without having to do much of anything. Now, these are rather large files. You do have to wait for them to download, a couple gigabytes in size. But there is really no installation required. You can add more RAM or processor cores when you configure everything. And if you just want to get started quickly, this is a great way to do it. Now, Windows requires an extra step because UTM cannot provide you the operating system. You have to get that from Microsoft. But there are some very simple ways to acquire that operating system image, which we'll step through here. Now, as far as which ARM version of Windows to choose, my choice is Windows 11 when you're running it on a Mac or any ARM device for that matter, because I found that Windows 11's compatibility with 64-bit Intel and AMD apps is better than what you might see on Windows 10. Things just run smoother. So I think Windows 11, even if you're not fond of it on a regular Windows PC, is the way to go on the Mac. But the installation process for 10 or 11 will be roughly the same. Now, if I click on Windows 11 here, you can see it doesn't have a download option, but it does have a guide option. And what this will do is take you to a very easy to follow step-by-step guide to getting started. And they have an option here for you to acquire the Windows disk image using an application called Crystal Fetch. And I happen to have that running right now. So if I pull it up here, what you will see when you execute Windows Fetch is that it will give you the option to download Windows 11 or 10 and which version of Windows you want. So I'm going to choose the Apple Silicon version, which is the ARM version of Windows, because I have an Apple Silicon device. And I'm going to select English, and I'll just select the regular Windows 11 edition here. And then I'll click on Download, and we'll accept the Microsoft terms and conditions here. And what it will do is download this image. And I think it's going to put it in our Downloads folder. So we'll let this download, and when it's done, we'll begin the next step. So it is now done downloading. And what it will do when it reaches the end of that download process is ask you where you want to put the file. So we're going to stick it in my Downloads folder. So I'll click on Move here. And now we've got that file ready to go. So we can close now Crystal Fetch because we have our disk image. And once we've done that now, we go back over to UTM. And what we're going to say here is virtualize because we are running with an ARM operating system. I'm going to select Windows. And by the way, you can actually run Mac OS, another version of it, inside your Mac virtually with UTM here. But we're going to keep it simple here and look at Windows. So we're going to say install Windows 10 or higher. So we're going to make sure that install Windows 10 or higher is checked on. We're going to make sure that import VHDX image is checked off. And because we also need to install some drivers to make Windows work under this environment, we want to make sure that this is checked on. And the last thing we're going to do is browse to that file that we just downloaded. And mine, of course, is in the Downloads folder. Yours is going to look very similar to mine, a bunch of gibberish here, but that's what we downloaded. I'm going to click on Open, and then I'm going to click on Continue. Now what we can decide here is how much RAM we want to dedicate to the Windows operating system. Now here is where your choice of Mac and its memory becomes important. So when I bought this MacBook Air, the default was 8 gigabytes. I opted for the 16 gigabyte version. And I would suggest you do the same, because when you're running an operating system virtually, you do need to dedicate RAM to that virtual machine. By default, it is looking to give Windows 4 gigs, but I think 8 gigs is probably better. So I'm going to allocate that. CPU cores you can leave at default. I think it will default to 2. I've got 8 cores on this, 4 performance and 4 efficiency. So what I think I might do is just have 2 cores dedicated to Windows. And of course, you can come back and edit this stuff later, which we'll look at. I'll click on Continue here. It's next asking me how big of a virtual drive do I want. It's defaulting to 64. I'm just going to say 32. This is one area where it won't reserve the disk space right away. As you put files into it, it will fill up. But let's just keep it at 32 for now to keep things simple. And what we'll do next is have a shared directory path. So this is where you can have your Mac and Windows machines easily share files. And you can decide not to have this enabled if you want to keep them completely isolated. But I'm going to point mine at the Downloads directory in case I want to have a way of very easily getting Windows files back and forth to my Mac without having to go through something else. And we'll click on Continue here. And then we've got the name here. I'm just going to call this Windows Test so I can differentiate it from my other one here. And we're going to click on Save. Now you're going to want to wait for those Windows tools to finish downloading, and once they do, you can spin up the virtual machine here by clicking Play. Now one thing you have to make sure that you do is when it asks you to press a key to boot off the CD-ROM, you have to hit the key. If you just let it sit there, it's going to drop you into a command shell and wait for nothing. So make sure you hit the key when it tells you to. That's the only thing you have to do to get started here, at least initially. And what we're going to be guided through now is the basic Windows 11 installation. Now, I don't have a product key for Windows, but you can skip through that. It will nag you from time to time, but you can get by here without having to have that Windows key right away. And of course, Microsoft wants to sell you stuff, so they no longer make it so that you have to have the key to get the Windows installation installed. So what I'm going to do here is click on I don't have a product key, and I'm going to select Windows 11 Home in this instance, just because I want to keep it simple. And I'll click Accept. And we just work through our process here of installing. Now what it did find here was that 32 gigabytes of hard drive that I created, that virtual one. So we'll go ahead and click Next there. And what this is going to do is install Windows on that partition. This will take a few minutes, so we'll let this run its course, and when it's done, we'll see what happens next. All right, this took a while, but it is now done. We logged back into Windows, and now we are at the desktop. Now, the last step for getting UTM to work is to get the guest tools set up. And because we had checked that box when we first started this installation, that option here is presented to us. So what we're going to do here is just go over to Next. And by the way, you'll see my mouse cursor getting a little wacky here. It's just due to how I'm capturing the screen right now. So I'm going to click on Agree here and go through the process of getting these drivers installed. One of the things that will be installed during this installation process are video drivers so that we can resize the window here and have Windows readjust to it. So you can see right there that video driver kicked in, and that adjusted the size of the screen. So if you had a larger screen, of course, you could make the window larger or smaller, and Windows will fill up the space here. And on some of those pre-built Linux images, you'll also be able to do that. So there's a lot of flexibility here to get things working just the way you want and have it integrated into your Mac the way you would like. Let's let this finish up, and we'll make sure that our installation completed successfully. All right, all is good here, so I can make this window a little larger, and you can see that it did that. And then I can also make it go full screen here, and things will readjust to get the full screen image. Now I want to direct your attention to a couple of things here on the top of the screen. This command here is not as important for this particular installation, but on some older operating systems, you have to have UTM capture the mouse input so that you can use the mouse inside of the virtual machine. But because Windows 11 And those drivers we just installed is all integrated nicely into Mac OS here. We can have our mouse work on both the Mac side and the Windows side effortlessly, as you can see. So we don't need to worry about that. This here allows you to map your USB devices. By default, you'll get your audio and your networking and all the important stuff dialed in directly. But if you have some type of USB device that you want to connect to the Windows machine, you would select it with that USB option there. Up here is a CD-ROM mounting option. So if you have CD disk images, you can load them up this way and it'll appear as a CD-ROM inside of the virtual machine. And then next to that, we have our shared folder option. Now you'll recall when we first set this up, we pointed it at our downloads folder. That's what it's set to right now, but I could change it to something else just by clicking here and selecting the folder. And where this appears is as your Z drive. So if I go into the Explorer and go over to my computer, you can see that we've got this Z drive here, and that points to my downloads directory. So I've got this test image here, and you can see that loaded up just fine. If I go back to the Mac side here, I can select that image here as well. So it's the same exact directory that's in both places, and that's how you'll get files transferred back and forth. In this case, I put them in my downloads folder, and I can easily access them in either operating system. This is also on my network. It will share whatever active network connection you have. So you can get out to the internet, but you could also connect to network-attached storage devices. So there you go, Windows 11 running just fine on here. Everything is nicely integrated. I can pop out a full screen here and run it just as a window. I can resize everything. I've got network access, so I can load up the awful browser that comes with Windows here, Edge, and do all sorts of stuff. I don't even know what I'm agreeing to here. But I can go and visit the web, download a better browser, do whatever. It just seems to be working nicely. And it's nice to see that, something that's a free open source project has really an easy path here to getting Windows in this instance booted and running. I'm going to shut this down real quick. Let's take a look at that Linux image that we downloaded earlier so you can see how a pre-packaged thing might work. So let's jump into the downloads folder here. Let's click on the zip file that was downloaded earlier. And as you can see here, as things are expanding, we get a UTM file. So let's let this finish up here. And once it is done extracting, I can just double click on this and bring it right in and hit the play button here to get started. Now, unlike what we just did with Windows, we don't have to install anything because this is a pre-baked image. I can just jump right in with the password Ubuntu, which was what the instructions said I should use. And we're in. Now, of course, there are security implications with downloading somebody else's pre-configured operating system, but you can very quickly spin up a Linux instance in this instance and get going without a lot of fuss. But of course, you can go ahead and just download the image from Ubuntu's website and install it from scratch if you prefer to go that route. Now, as you saw earlier, when we were getting things configured, we do have the option to emulate versus running these ARM operating systems virtually. And emulation is slower. So if you were maybe looking to run an old Windows XP app, you can install Windows XP and emulate that Intel or AMD experience here, but it will be sluggish. Load times are a bit long. Some of the performance won't be there. So if your application can run in Windows 11, I would run it in the Windows 11 ARM environment because the Microsoft translation is a lot faster than the emulation that UTM will provide. But there are some fun examples I can show you of emulation. So for example, I've got this image that I downloaded of a complete Windows 95 installation. I did try getting this to work on my own, and I eventually just gave up and used somebody else's image to get started. And what I've basically replicated inside of this image is what my college laptop looked like back in 1998, because I am a digital pack rat and I retained all of my files here. So we can jump in. Now here is where we need to do the mouse capture. So I'm going to click on that capture input device, and it gives you instructions for how to get out of it later. So I'm going to click OK here, and then I'm going to go over to the OK button. And this will bring us into Windows 95, complete with networking and my audio working here as well. Let me show you what I can do with this. All right, so on the desktop here, I'm going to go to my Start menu, go to Programs, and load up PowerPoint. And this is PowerPoint 97, of course. And I think we're running with like a 486 or Pentium profile, and I'll show you some of the configuration options there. And I'm just going to load up a presentation I did way back in 1998, I think. And if I go and look at all the slides here, you can get a feel for how quickly everything loads up. So it's pretty quick and snappy here. I can go ahead and play the slideshow and show you how some of the transitions work. So it's, about what you would expect out of something from this era, maybe a little bit faster perhaps than the machine I ran it on at the time. But it's working, and it's pretty cool to have this thing I could just boot up and replicate that experience. I even have Outlook Express running here with my inbox imported, so everything is kind of like a little time capsule of the month that I graduated college, which is pretty awesome. So that's one thing that you can do here. I'm going to leave this running. I'm going to hit Control-Option to release control of my mouse. We'll go back over to UTM, and I've got another fun one here. This is Mac OS 9.21, and I haven't done much with this yet, so I'm still struggling to get files in and out. One of the issues you run into with retro operating systems is that you can't set up that shared folder. It just doesn't work with Windows 95 or the old version of Mac OS. So I've been FTPing files in and out, which works, but is not the most elegant way to handle it. But here you can see Mac OS 9.2 booting up, and this is emulating, I believe, a PowerPC Mac. So kind of a mid-90s configuration. And that will load up here. Again, emulation is going to be a little slower on this. I think there are faster emulation options out there. Sheep Shaver and Basilisk are two that I've used in the past here, but we're able to get this Mac loaded up here. I don't have anything all that fun to look at, but we can maybe load up the text editor just to get a feel for how that works. So kind of fun to be able to go back to the future here and run an old Mac on our new Mac, which is neat. So those two retro images were things that I was able to find online and just bring in already pre-configured, but you can configure this yourself, and let me just show you how much depth there is to it. So we're just going to click on that Windows installation we were just playing with, and if we go over to System, you can see just how many different architectures you have to choose from here. A lot of stuff. Again, this is all part of QEMU. In this instance, we had the i386, x86 selected. Of course, on the Mac side, we would be using the PowerPC, but you can see you have a bunch of other options here as well. And then within each architecture, you've got a number of systems to choose from. And the guy that set up that Windows 95 install spent a lot of time going through all these different things, finding the drivers, getting everything installed. But you can configure everything from essentially what version of an i386 you're running with, down to the type of network card that you're working with, the audio drivers, you name it. It is quite extensive, and you can spend a lot of time in here getting things tweaked. And of course, it's very easy to screw something up as well. So usually keeping a good backup of what you are about to mess with prior to messing with it would be recommended here. And here you can see what we had set up for the Mac that we were playing with as well. So lots of cool stuff here with UTM. Free of charge, worth trying out, especially if you've been thinking about getting one of these Macs. You do have a lot of virtualization and emulation options within this application. And of course, there are lots of other standalone emulators that you can run older systems with too. So that's going to do it for this one. UTM, check it out if you got a Mac. And until next time, this is Lon.TV. Thanks for watching.